Whispers followed her down the aisle, but they were not the admiring gasps she had prayed for. They were the cold, sharp daggers of gossip. Amelia Ashworth stood in her wedding silks, a perfect bride, waiting for a groom who would never arrive. Left abandoned at the altar, her family's ruin was sealed in the suffocating silence of the chapel. But then a shadow fell over the pews. A voice, cold as iron and rich with power, cut through the quiet. "I believe you are in need of a groom." The Duke of Rothaven, a man she had never met, was walking towards her. What secret forced his hand, and what price would she pay for this shocking rescue? Sunlight, heavy and judgmental, slanted through the stained glass windows of St. George's Chapel. It illuminated the dust motes, dancing over the expectant faces of the ton, all gathered to witness the union of Miss Amelia Ashworth and the devastatingly handsome Lord Gregory Vance. Amelia stood in the small antechamber, her fingers clamped so tightly around her bouquet of lilies that her knuckles were white. Her dress, of fine silk her mother had sacrificed a family heirloom to afford, felt suddenly heavy, like a shroud. "He is merely late, my dear," her father, Baron Ashworth, muttered, his face a mottled red. He pulled at his collar, his own anxiety, a sharp, sour scent in the air. The boy is fashionable, always fashionable. But Amelia knew. The sick dread that had been a small, cold stone in her stomach for a week had blossomed into a glacier. Gregory had been distant, his smiles not quite reaching his eyes, his touch cool. She had told herself it was pre-wedding nerves. She had been a fool. The organist, who had been playing a soft, hopeful prelude, faltered. His fingers stumbled on the keys, creating a discordant note that echoed the sudden, terrible shift in the chapel's atmosphere. The quiet murmur of the guests had stilled. It was a complete, suffocating void of sound. Amelia stepped forward, pushing past her father. She had to see. She moved to the edge of the doorway, peering into the crowded nave. Every head was turned, not towards her, but towards the back. A young man, one of Gregory's groomsmen, was striding up the aisle, alone. He looked pale, his movements hurried. He didn't stop at the altar but went directly to her father and pressed a folded piece of parchment into his hand. Baron Ashworth's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal. Amelia watched his face. She saw the blood drain from it, leaving a waxy, grey pallor. She saw his eyes widen, not in anger, but in a kind of profound, devastated shock. "Father," Amelia whispered, though she already knew. He didn't speak. His hand fell to his side, the letter slipping from his nerveless fingers. It drifted to the cold stone floor. The whispers began. They started at the front, a ripple of shocked intakes of breath, and grew into a wave of hissing commentary that crashed over Amelia. Abandoned. At the altar, can you imagine? Poor girl. Her family is ruined. Heard he was seen with Lady Diana Sterling. Her dowry is 10,000 a year. Amelia felt the floor tilt. Her mother let out a small, strangled sob and fumbled for a handkerchief. Ruined. The word was an executioner's blade. Her father had leveraged everything on this match. His creditors had been circling, held at bay only by the promise of Gregory's wealth. Now, they would descend. Amelia felt 1,000 needles of humiliation pricking her skin. She was a spectacle, a tragedy to be dissected over tea and biscuits for the next month. She backed away from the doorway, her vision blurring, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She was going to faint. She knew it. She leaned against the cold oak paneling, the world spinning into a pinwheel of bright glass and dark stone. The wedding will proceed. The voice was not a shout, but it commanded the attention of every soul in the chapel. It was deep, resonant, and held an arctic chill. The whispers died instantly, cut off as if by a knife. Amelia's vision swam back into focus. The crowd had parted, creating a wide aisle. A man was walking towards her. He was not a guest. He was a presence, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a perfectly tailored coat of black, superfine wool that spoke of immense, effortless wealth. His face was a masterpiece of aristocratic disdain, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He moved with an unhurried, predatory grace, his boots echoing on the stone. Amelia knew who he was. Everyone did. Arthur Blackwood, the Duke of Rothaven. He was a myth, a recluse, the wealthiest man in England, rumoured to be ruthless in business and colder still in person. He had not been seen at a society event in 5 years, not since the tragic death of his first wife. He did not stop at the pews. He did not pause to speak to her father. He walked directly up the aisle, through the antechamber doorway, and stopped a single pace from Amelia. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. She could see now the fine silver threads at his temples, the lines of concentration etched between his brows. He was not handsome like Gregory. Gregory was a summer day. This man was the raw, untamed beauty of a midnight storm. His gaze flickered over her, taking in her trembling form, the tears clinging to her lashes, the white-knuckled grip on her flowers. "Miss Ashworth," he stated. His voice was even colder up close. "I believe you are in need of a groom." Amelia could only stare, her mouth half open. The Duke's gaze did not waver. He offered her his arm, his gloved hand held steady. "Your Grace," her father stammered, scrambling forward, "I don't understand." "You understand perfectly, Baron," the Duke said, his eyes never leaving Amelia's. "Your daughter is at the altar. I am at the altar. The guests are present. The vicar is waiting. It seems a terrible waste of lilies to do otherwise." It was not a proposal. It was a declaration. Amelia looked from the Duke's impassive, powerful face to her father's, which was now filled with a wild, desperate hope. She looked at her weeping mother. She thought of her younger sisters, their futures now entirely dependent on this single bizarre moment. She thought of the whispers, the humiliation, the cold, empty carriage ride home. Ruin was one path. This dark, terrifying, unexplainable man was the other. Her hand, as if it had a will of its own, lifted from her bouquet. The lilies scattered, unheeded, onto the floor. She placed her trembling fingers on the black wool of the Duke's offered arm. His hand immediately covered hers, a gesture that was not gentle but possessive. Final. "Good," he said, as if concluding a minor business arrangement. He turned, pulling her with him, and guided her out of the shadows of the antechamber and into the full, stunned view of the entire London society. "Vicar," the Duke of Rothaven's voice boomed, "let us begin. The bride is impatient." The ceremony was a blur. Amelia moved through it like a woman in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. She was aware of the vicar's voice, trembling as he skipped half the liturgy to get to the binding phrases. She felt the heavy, cold weight of the ring the Duke produced. A simple, thick band of gold he must have taken from his own finger, as it was far too large for hers. She said, "I do," when her father, standing behind her, prodded her sharply in the back. The Duke's "I will" was a firm, resonant sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the chapel. The moment the vicar pronounced them, man and wife, before the customary blessing or the stunned organist could react. The Duke turned. He did not kiss her. He simply took her hand, tucked it back into the crook of his arm, and began the long walk back down the aisle. The ton was utterly silent. Jaws were slack. Eyes were wide with disbelief. Amelia kept her gaze fixed on the great oak doors at the end of the aisle. She could feel the heat of the Duke's body through the sleeve of his coat. He smelled of sandalwood, old leather, and something metallic, like cold steel. They emerged into the pale November sunlight. A magnificent black carriage, bearing the Rothaven crest, was already there, as if it had been waiting for him all along. The groomsman who had delivered Gregory's note was standing by the steps, his face ashen. He was, Amelia realized, the Duke's man, not Gregory's. This entire event, from the delivery of the note to the Duke's timely arrival, had been orchestrated. The Duke handed her into the carriage without a word, his touch impersonal, but firm. He climbed in after her, settling onto the opposite velvet squab. He rapped the roof with his cane, and the carriage lurched into motion. They sat in silence. The carriage was cavernous, insulated from the sounds of the street. Amelia stared at her hands, the oversized gold band sliding precariously on her finger. She was now the Duchess of Rothaven. The title felt like a borrowed coat, absurdly large and belonging to someone else. "You have questions," he said. It was not a query. Amelia swallowed. Her throat was dry. "Why?" she finally whispered. The Duke, Arthur Blackwood, stared out the window, his profile sharp against the passing London streetscape. Lord Vance's actions were a stain on his class. Such behaviour invites anarchy. It required a definitive response. A definitive response? Amelia's voice gained a tremor of disbelief, her shock beginning to give way to a cold prickle of anger. "Your Grace, you have just married a woman you do not know. That is not a response. That is madness." He turned his head slowly to look at her. His winter-grey eyes assessed her, not as a bride, but as a new, interesting puzzle. Madness, Duchess, is allowing a worm like Gregory Vance to shatter the reputation of an old family without consequence. What I did was strategic. "You used me," Amelia stated, the pieces clicking into place. "The note. Your man. You knew Gregory wouldn't be there." "I knew Vance was a coward and a fool, ruled by his appetites," the Duke corrected her. "I knew he was courting Lady Diana Sterling. I merely ensured he had the opportunity to make his choice, and that his choice was made public. His humiliation of you was the lever. My intervention was the force. You wanted to ruin him. I wanted to demonstrate that actions have consequences," he replied smoothly. "And in doing so, I have saved your family. Your father's debts will be settled by my solicitors this afternoon. Your sisters will have dowries. You will have a title and a fortune beyond anything Vance could have ever provided." He laid it all out like a balance sheet, her humiliation traded for her family's salvation, her life traded for a title. "And what do you get, Your Grace?" Amelia asked, her voice low. "You already have a title and a fortune. What was worth binding yourself to a stranger?" For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. "I required a duchess," he said simply. "Rothaven needs an heir. My previous experience left me disinclined to endure the circus of a London season. You are well bred, you are available, and you are now mine. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement." Amelia felt a chill colder than the November air. He spoke of his first wife, the tragic Isabella, as a previous experience. He spoke of this, their wedding day, as an arrangement. "So I am a broodmare," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. The Duke's eyes narrowed. "You are the Duchess of Rothaven. You will be afforded every respect and luxury that title commands. In return, you will provide the heir that is required." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Do we understand each other, Amelia?" He had used her name. It sounded alien in his mouth, a piece of her old life he now claimed ownership of. "And if I cannot?" she dared to ask. The carriage hit a bump, and the oversized ring on her finger clinked against the window frame. "Then you shall be the wealthiest, most secure, and most barren duchess in England," he replied, his voice softening just a fraction. "But you will still be the duchess. I do not default on my bargains, and I expect you to uphold yours." The carriage slowed, turning through a massive wrought-iron gate. They had arrived at Rothaven House, the Duke's monolithic London palace. It loomed before them, a mountain of grey stone and dark windows, intimidating and impenetrable. "Your new home," the Duke said. Amelia looked at the imposing facade, then back at the cold, powerful man sitting opposite her. She had been saved from ruin, only to be thrust into a gilded cage, locked by a man far more dangerous than Gregory Vance had ever been. The carriage door was opened by a footman. The Duke stepped out, then turned and offered his hand to help her down. This time she did not hesitate. She placed her hand in his, stepped onto the pavement, and let her new husband lead her into the shadows of his house. Rothaven House was not a home. It was a mausoleum. The entry hall was vast, paved in black and white marble, and disturbingly quiet. A line of servants stood at rigid attention, their faces blank. They were led by a woman in black bombazine who looked as if she hadn't smiled since the previous century. "Mrs. Croft," the Duke said, stripping off his gloves. "This is the Duchess, my wife." Mrs. Croft executed a perfect, chilling curtsy. "Your Grace." Her eyes, small and dark, swept over Amelia, cataloguing her damp dress, her scattered hair, and her terrified expression. It was a look of profound disapproval. "You will show the Duchess to the mistress's chambers. See that her belongings are fetched from her father's house, and that a new wardrobe is commissioned immediately. From Madame Dubois. She will require everything. Yes, Your Grace. We will dine at 8, in the main dining room. You will join me, Duchess," he said to Amelia. "Until then, Mrs. Croft will see to your needs." He did not wait for a reply. He simply turned and strode down a long, dark corridor, his footsteps echoing, until he was swallowed by the gloom. Amelia was left alone with Mrs. Croft. "If you will follow me, Your Grace," the housekeeper said, her voice as starched as her apron. Amelia's new chambers were vast. They comprised a sitting room, a dressing room, and a bedroom large enough to host a small ball. But they were also cold. The furniture was exquisite, covered in pale blue damask, but it was all shrouded in dust covers. "The last Duchess," Amelia began, gesturing to the shrouded furniture. "The late Duchess's chambers were in the West Wing, Your Grace," Mrs. Croft said stiffly. "These are the traditional rooms of the lady of the house. They have not been used in some time." "The West Wing?" Mrs. Croft's lips thinned into a razor line. "The Duke keeps the West Wing sealed, in memory of the late Duchess Isabella. You will not go there. Those are the rules." The rules! Amelia was discovering there were many. The afternoon was a blur of fittings, of maids unpacking her few meagre trunks, their contents looking pathetic against the backdrop of such opulence. Mrs. Croft presented her with a set of keys. "These are for the household accounts, the silver vault, and the linen press. This one," she said, holding up a heavy, ornate iron key, "is for the wine cellar. The Duke is very particular about his cellar." Amelia was given no key for the West Wing. At precisely 8 o'clock, she descended the grand staircase, dressed in the only suitable gown she owned, a deep green velvet. The Duke was waiting for high-backed chairs at either end, a distance of 30 feet between them. The meal was served in perfect oppressive silence by footmen who moved like ghosts. The Duke ate, his attention fixed on his plate. "Did my father receive your solicitors?" Amelia asked, desperate to break the silence. "He did," the Duke replied, not looking up. "His debts are cleared. Your family is solvent. I have purchased a commission for your brother in the Royal Navy." Amelia's heart leapt. Her brother Robert had dreamt of the Navy. "How did you—" "I know the Admiral of the Fleet. It was a simple matter." He finally raised his eyes. "You have upheld your part of our bargain, Duchess. I am upholding mine." This was her life now. A series of transactions. Weeks passed. A routine established itself, as rigid as a military drill. Amelia breakfasted alone in her chambers. She spent her days reading in the massive, cold library or walking in the small, walled-in garden. She dined with the Duke every night at 8. Their conversations were brief, formal, and utterly devoid of personal connection. He gave her a staggering allowance, which she used to buy books, and, much to Mrs. Croft's disapproval, to send anonymous donations of food and coal to the orphanage in Cheapside, a district she knew well from her own family's poorer days. He never came to her chambers. She never went to his. The arrangement was, as he had predicted, secure and barren. The first crack in their perfect cold facade appeared at the winter ball, hosted by the Duke's aunt. It was Amelia's first public appearance as the Duchess of Rothaven. She was a spectacle. The whispers followed her as she entered the ballroom on the Duke's arm. But this time, the whispers were not of pity. They were of awe and fear. She was the woman the terrifying Duke had plucked from obscurity. And then she saw him, Gregory Vance. He was standing near the champagne fountain, his new wife, Lady Diana, clinging to his arm. He looked the same, arrogant, handsome, and utterly pleased with himself. When he saw Amelia, his eyes widened, and then he smiled, a slow, condescending smile. He raised his glass to her in a mocking toast. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. The old familiar humiliation washed over her. Before she could react, a hand settled on the small of her back. It was the Duke's. His touch was firm, possessive, and radiated an incredible warmth through the fabric of her gown. "Do not give him the satisfaction of your fear, Duchess," Arthur murmured, his voice pitched so only she could hear it. His lips brushed the shell of her ear, a shockingly intimate gesture. "You are a lioness now. He is a scavenger. Look at him as you would any other insect." His strength flowed into her. She lifted her chin. She met Gregory's gaze, and she smiled. A small, cold, dismissive smile, the kind she had seen the Duke use a dozen times. Gregory's smile faltered. "Good," Arthur breathed. He guided her onto the dance floor. As he took her in his arms for the waltz, he did not look at her. He looked over her head, his gaze fixed on Gregory Vance. And for the first time, Amelia realized the Duke's coldness was not an absence of feeling. It was a banked fire. His hand tightened on her waist. "He will not look at you again," the Duke promised. And for the rest of the night, Gregory Vance did not. He and his new wife left the ball within the hour. Amelia went to bed that night, feeling something new. It was not love. It was not even affection. It was a strange, unsettling flutter of protection. Her husband, the cold, calculating stranger, was a shield. But as she lay in her cold, lonely bed, she wondered, a shield against what? And what was the price of his protection? The mystery of the West Wing began to haunt Amelia. Mrs. Croft's warning had been stark, but it only fueled Amelia's curiosity. What had happened to the first Duchess, Isabella? The Tun whispered of a tragic accident. Mrs. Croft's grimness suggested something more, and the Duke spoke of her as a previous experience, yet he had sealed an entire wing of his house in her memory. The two facts did not align. Amelia began her investigation subtly. She asked the younger maids, the ones less indoctrinated by Mrs. Croft's reign of terror. "Oh, 'twas a terrible thing, Your Grace," whispered Sarah, a young housemaid, her eyes wide as she polished the silver. "They say she was beautiful, like a porcelain doll, but sad. Always sad. She fell, you see." "Fell?" Amelia pressed. "From the balcony, in the west wing, right onto the stone terrace below." Sarah shuddered. "The Duke, they say he didn't leave his study for a month, and when he came out, he ordered the wing locked. No one's been in since. A fall, or a jump." Amelia became obsessed. The west wing was on the same floor as her own chambers, but the hallway connecting them was blocked by a heavy, locked oak door. There was no key for it on the ring Mrs. Croft had given her. But Amelia was Baron Ashworth's daughter, a man who had taught his children many things, including, during a brief and misguided period of living off the land, how to pick a simple lock. Her father had been terrible at it. Amelia, with her small, nimble fingers, had been a natural. One night, long after the house had fallen silent, Amelia crept from her room, a single candle in her hand. She carried with her a thin metal hairpin. The lock on the west wing door was old, but it was not complex. It took her less than a minute. The tumblers clicked, loud in the silent hall. She pushed the door open. The sound of the hinges groaning was a scream in the darkness. A rush of cold, stale air hit her, carrying the scent of dust and dried flowers. She stepped inside. The west wing was a time capsule. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating furniture shrouded in white cloths, like a garden of ghosts. It was exactly as the maid had said. This wing was not abandoned. It was preserved. She walked through a sitting room, her feet silent on the thick carpet. At the end of the hall was a bedroom. Isabella's bedroom. It was beautiful. Lighter, more feminine than the rest of the house. The colors were cream and rose. A portrait of a young woman hung over the fireplace. Isabella. She was, as the maid had said, exquisite. Dark, curling hair, large, luminous eyes, and a small, pouting mouth. She also looked, Amelia thought with a pang, incredibly fragile. On the bedside table, next to a dried, blackened rose in a crystal vase, was a small, leather-bound book. A diary. Amelia's hand trembled. This was a violation, an intrusion on a dead woman's most private thoughts. She should leave, but she didn't. She sat on the edge of the dusty, shrouded bed, opened the book, and began to read. The early entries were full of light, the giddy joy of a young woman engaged to the most powerful man in England. "Arthur is so strong, so serious. He frightens me a little, but he is kind. He says I am his dove." Amelia's stomach tightened. The Duke had called his first wife Dove. He had never called Amelia anything but Duchess or Amelia. She read on. The entries grew shorter, the handwriting more frantic. October 14th. Arthur is consumed by his business in Parliament. I am so lonely. The house is so quiet. Mrs. Croft watches me. I know she thinks I am a foolish child. November 2nd. I saw G today. He laughed when I told him to leave. He said I was a fool to think marrying a duke would make me safe from him. He knows my secret. Amelia frowned. G. November 10th. G came again. He wants money. He says if I do not give it to him, he will tell Arthur what I was, what my family was. He says Arthur would cast me out. He is right. Arthur values his name above all else. November 20th. I gave G the pearls Arthur gave me. He said they were not enough. He said he would be back. He said he would always be back. He called me his pretty little investment. December 1st. Arthur asked me where the pearls were. I lied. I told him I had lost them. He looked at me, and his eyes were so cold. He knows I lied. He knows I am not the perfect wife he wanted. He is disgusted with me. December 5th. He is here again. G is in the garden. He is waving at me. He will not leave. There is no escape. Arthur will discover me. He will hate me. I cannot bear it. I cannot bear his disgust. The last entry was dated December 6th, the day she fell. Amelia's blood ran cold. This was not a suicide born of sadness. It was one born of terror. Isabella was being blackmailed. But who was G? Amelia flipped back through the pages, searching for a name. She found it in an early entry about a ball she had attended before her marriage. I danced with Gregory Vance tonight. He is terribly charming, but his eyes are cruel. I hope I never see him again. G. Gregory. Gregory Vance. Amelia snapped the book shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. Gregory Vance, the man who had jilted her, had driven the first Duchess of Rothaven to her death. This changed everything. Arthur's strategic intervention at the wedding, it wasn't about her. It wasn't about saving her family. It was about revenge. She heard a sound in the hallway, a heavy, measured footstep. Amelia's candle flame guttered. She was trapped. The door to the bedroom swung open, silhouetting a massive figure in the frame. So, the Duke's voice, devoid of all warmth, echoed in the dead woman's room. My new wife has a taste for trespassing. Amelia sprang to her feet, the diary clutched to her chest. Arthur! His name felt strange on her lips, a plea in the dusty moonlit room. He ignored it. He strode into the room, his fury a tangible, vibrating force. He was in his shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, as if he had been pacing his own study. You were forbidden, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. This room is a grave. You have no right. She was being blackmailed, Amelia burst out, the words tumbling over each other. She didn't jump because she was sad. She was terrified. He was ruining her. The Duke froze. He had been advancing on her, his face a mask of cold rage. Now, he simply stopped, his expression locking into something she couldn't read. What did you say? Isabella, Amelia said, holding out the diary. She wrote it all down. A man, G. He was threatening her, extorting money from her. He was threatening to tell you a secret about her past. Arthur looked at the book as if it were a coiled snake. He did not take it. She was Isabella Darcy, he said, his voice hollow. Her family was as old as mine. Impoverished, yes, but their line was pure. She had no secrets. She thought she did, Amelia insisted, stepping towards him, and he made her believe it. Gee, he drove her to this. He was in the garden. He wouldn't leave. He was tormenting her, and his name is Gregory Vance. The name landed in the silent room like a cannonball. Arthur's face, which had been a mask of ice, shattered. For a split second, Amelia saw the man beneath. A man consumed by a grief so profound it was terrifying. Vance, he whispered. The name was acid on his tongue. You knew, Amelia realized, her blood running cold. At the wedding, when you rescued me. You already knew he was connected to her. No, Arthur said, turning away from her, running a hand through his hair. I suspected, but I had no proof. He walked to the window, staring out at the stone terrace below. I knew Vance was a blackguard, a gambler, a collector of women. I knew he and Isabella had moved in the same circles before we were married. He clenched his fists, his back still to her. After she died, I investigated. I found payments from her accounts, large sums, made to an address in Cheapside. But the trail went cold. I assumed she had a gambling debt, or a secret lover. I assumed she was unfaithful. He turned back, his eyes burning with a self-loathing that stole Amelia's breath. I thought she was unfaithful, and when I confronted her, she jumped. I believed I had driven her to it. That my disgust, as she put it. He choked on the word. She wrote that, Amelia whispered, her anger at him melting into a strange, aching pity. She wrote that she couldn't bear your disgust, but it wasn't you she was afraid of. It was him. I sealed the wing, Arthur continued, his voice rough. I sealed it all away. The grief, the guilt, the shame. I let the ton believe it was a tragic accident. I let her family believe it, and I let myself believe I was a monster. You are not a monster, Arthur, Amelia said, stepping closer. And then, he said, ignoring her, his voice hardening, I see him. Vance, preening at balls, ruining his tailor, and setting his sights on the next innocent. He set his sights on you. A girl from a good family, desperate for a match. The same pattern, just like Isabella. So the wedding. I had been watching him, Arthur confessed. I knew he was about to jilt you for the sterling dowry. I saw a chance. To protect you, yes. But more to trap him. To bind him to me. How? By marrying you, Amelia. I made his insult to you a personal insult to the Duke of Rothaven. I gave myself the right to ruin him, the right to destroy him utterly, in a way that would not be questioned. It was a cold calculation, a debt to the dead. Amelia stood, absorbing the shock. Her entire marriage, her rescue, her new life, it was all a careful, intricate prelude to a revenge plot. She had been a pawn, a very well-treated, very well-dressed pawn. You used me, she said, the words flat. Yes, he said, unflinching. I did. I used your humiliation to justify my war, and I would do it again. Amelia should have been furious. She should have been outraged. But as she looked at him, the powerful Duke, standing broken in his dead wife's room, she felt only a terrible, aching clarity. He called her his pretty little investment, Amelia said, reading from the diary. He said he would always be back. This isn't just about your guilt, Arthur. This is about justice for her. He finally looked at her, really looked at her. Not as a duchess, not as a brood mare, not as a pawn, but as an equal. He destroyed my first wife, Amelia, Arthur said, his voice raw. I will not let him destroy my second. The "my" hung in the air, a word of possession, but this time it felt different. It felt like a promise. What do we do? Amelia asked, closing the diary. First, the Duke said, his eyes turning from pained to flinty, we open this wing, we let in the light. And then, he took the diary from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. We find the address in Cheapside. The following morning, the staff of Rothaven House was thrown into chaos. The Duke, in a voice that brooked no argument, ordered the West Wing unsealed, unshrouded, and aired. Mrs. Croft looked as if she might faint, but she obeyed. While the maids scrubbed away the past, Arthur and Amelia sat opposite each other in his study. The room, usually his solitary fortress, now felt shared. He had Isabella's diary open on the desk. Cheapside. The payments were made to a Mr. Silas Croft. Amelia's head snapped up. Croft, like Mrs. Croft. Her brother, Arthur said, his expression grim. A disbarred solicitor, from what my man can gather. A bottom feeder, which makes him perfect for blackmail. So Mrs. Croft knew, Arthur finished, or at least suspected, which explains her loyalty. She was terrified I would discover her brother's connection to Isabella and her own part in it, likely introducing him to her. She protects my privacy to protect her own family's secrets. It was a web, intricate and venomous. "We must go to him," Amelia said. Arthur nodded. "Today. But not as the Duke and Duchess of Rothaven. He will bolt. We go as clients." 2 hours later, a plain, unmarked carriage rattled over the cobblestones of Cheapside, a world away from the manicured squares of Mayfair. The air was thick with the smell of coal smoke, spoiled fish, and humanity. Arthur was dressed in plain, respectable wool, looking more like a wealthy merchant than a duke. Amelia wore her most drab gown and a thick veil. They found the office of Silas Croft on the 3rd floor of a rickety, leaning building, above a gin shop. The room was filthy, stacked high with yellowing papers. Silas Croft was a small, rat-like man with ink-stained fingers and watery, nervous eyes. He looked at Arthur with suspicion. "We are here," Arthur said, his voice altered to a lower-class burr, "on behalf of a mutual acquaintance, Lord Gregory Vance." Croft's eyes widened. "Don't know the man." "Don't you?" Arthur said, dropping a heavy purse on the desk. The sound of the gold coins inside was shockingly loud. "He's been very careless. He left a certain young woman in a difficult position. We," he gestured to Amelia, "represent her family. We want to know what else he's been careless about. We're willing to pay for his vulnerabilities." Croft licked his lips, his gaze fixed on the purse. "I'm a solicitor. I don't—" "You're a blackmailer," Amelia said, her voice sharp and clear. "And you were Isabella, the late Duchess of Rothaven's blackmailer. Or were you just the middleman for Lord Vance?" Croft turned white. "I don't— Who are you?" Arthur moved, his speed startling. He crossed the small room and had Croft by his collar, lifting him partially out of his chair. The merchant disguise was gone. The Duke was present. "I am the man whose wife you helped kill," Arthur snarled, his voice a terrifying whisper. "Now, you have one chance. Talk." The story spilled out of Croft. He was pathetic. He had been Mrs. Croft's brother, and when she had seen the new Duchess was young, naive, and terrified of her new husband, she had mentioned it to him. Silas, seeing an opportunity, had dug into Isabella's past. The great secret was pathetic. Isabella's father had been a secret gambler and had briefly been in debtor's prison. That was it. A minor scandal, one Arthur would have paid to erase without a second thought. "But Lord Vance, he found out," Croft whimpered. "He knew the Duchess from before. He'd been courting her. He came to me, said we should work together. He said he could really scare her. He provided the intimidation. I just collected the money. I gave him his cut." "How much?" Arthur demanded. "Everything. He took it all. He said he was collecting a debt. He said she'd promised to marry him before the Duke came along, and this was his payment." Gregory hadn't just blackmailed Isabella. He'd done it out of spite, because she had chosen Arthur over him. "He was there," Croft was sobbing now, "the day she died. I saw him. He was in the garden, laughing, taunting her. She was on the balcony. He blew her a kiss and—" Arthur dropped him. Croft crumpled to the floor, a heap of misery. "And you," Arthur said, his voice ice. "You said nothing. You let me believe it was my fault." "It wasn't my business," Croft shrieked. "He would have ruined me." Arthur looked at Amelia. Her face was pale beneath the veil, but her eyes were burning. "What about my jilting?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling. "Was that part of it?" "I don't know," Croft wept. "But Vance, he was at the club last week, bragging. He said he'd plucked his bird, Lady Diana, and that he'd shown the little Ashworth mouse what happened when she aimed too high. He said, and the best part is, that cold-hearted devil Rothaven is stuck with her." Amelia recoiled as if struck. Arthur's face was stone. He turned to Silas Croft. "You will write all of this down. Every date, every payment, every meeting with Vance. You will sign it. And then you will give me the ledgers. All of them." "And you'll let me go?" Croft pleaded. "I won't kill you," Arthur said. "But the moment Lord Vance is ruined, your name will be given to the magistrates. You will hang for extortion. Or," he added, "you will be on a fast ship to Botany Bay. Your choice." He threw the purse on the floor. "Your fare." They left Croft scrambling for the gold, already drafting his confession. The carriage ride back to Mayfair was silent. Amelia's mind was reeling. Gregory's cruelty was more profound than she could have ever imagined. He hadn't just jilted her, he'd bragged about it, seeing it as a way to wound the Duke himself. Arthur finally spoke as they pulled up to Rothaven House. "He underestimated you, Amelia." "He underestimated us," she corrected. He looked at her, his grey eyes searching her face. "When I married you, it was a cold, calculated act. A means to an end." "I know," she said. "What I did not anticipate was you." He reached across the carriage and took her hand. His grasp was not possessive this time. It was warm. "You are not a pawn. You are a queen." He raised her hand to his lips. It was the first time he had initiated a truly gentle, personal contact. "Tonight," he said, his voice hardening again, "we host a ball, our first as Duke and Duchess, and we will see this through. Together." Rothaven House, once a fortress of solitude, was ablaze with light. For the first time in 5 years, the grand ballroom was open, filled with the music of a full orchestra, the scent of 1,000 flowers, and the glittering, gossiping mass of the Tun. Amelia stood at the top of the grand staircase, Arthur at her side. She was wearing a new gown, commissioned by the Duke, of the deepest midnight blue velvet, embroidered with tiny diamonds that glittered like stars. Around her throat was a new necklace, the Rothaven emeralds. They were heavy, cold, and a magnificent statement of power. She was no longer the jilted bride. She was the Duchess, and she was on the hunt. Gregory Vance and Lady Diana arrived late, as was their fashion. Gregory looked triumphant. His marriage had secured his finances, and his public humiliation of Amelia Ashworth had, in his mind, been forgotten, eclipsed by her shocking elevation. He saw them, his rival Duke and his spurned bride, and he had the audacity to saunter over, his new wife on his arm. "Your Grace," he said to Arthur, a sneer playing on his lips, "and Duchess." He bowed to Amelia, his eyes openly mocking her. "You are looking well. Marriage agrees with you. Though I must say, I am surprised to see you hosting. I always thought Rothaven was above such things." "Things change, Vance," Arthur said, his voice a pleasant, icy baritone. "We are celebrating. New beginnings." "Indeed," Gregory said. "Well, one man's cast off is another man's Duchess, it seems. You must thank me, Rothaven. If I hadn't discarded her, you'd have had to endure the season." Lady Diana giggled, a vapid, cruel sound. Amelia felt the old sting of humiliation, but then she felt Arthur's hand on her back, a solid, reassuring presence. "You are quite right, Vance," Amelia said, her own voice clear and cold, silencing the small crowd that had gathered. "I do have you to thank. If you hadn't been such a predictable fool, I would have been forced to marry a man of shallow character and even shallower pockets. Instead," she smiled, a radiant, brilliant smile, "I married a duke, a real one." Gregory's face flushed a dull, angry red. "If you'll excuse us," Arthur said, "my wife and I have guests to attend to, but do stay. The night is young." They moved away, leaving him fuming. An hour later, Arthur guided Amelia to a small, private alcove overlooking the ballroom. "It is time," he said. He had arranged it perfectly. Just outside the alcove, hidden by a large tapestry, stood several of the most influential men in England. Lady Diana's father, the Earl of Stirling, the Lord Chief Justice, and the most powerful banker in London. Arthur had ensured they overheard what was to come. Gregory, summoned by a footman, entered the alcove, his arrogance restored. "A private word, Rothaven? How clandestine." "A final one, Vance," Arthur said. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid a sheaf of papers on a small table. Silas Croft's signed confession, the ledgers showing the payments. "Isabella," Arthur said. Gregory's face went white. "I don't know what you mean." "She paid you," Arthur said. "You and Silas Croft. You bled her dry. You blackmailed her over a secret you knew was meaningless. You tormented her for sport. You stood in the garden and watched her on that balcony." "These are lies," Gregory blustered, but his eyes darted to the doorway, searching for an escape. "Are they?" Amelia said, stepping forward, Isabella's diary in her hands. "She wrote it all down, Gregory. Every threat, every payment, every time you called her your pretty little investment." Gregory looked from the ledgers to the diary, to the cold, implacable faces of the Duke and Duchess. He was trapped. "She was weak," he finally spat, his facade cracking. "She was a fool. She owed me. She was promised to me." "And what of me, Lord Vance?" Amelia asked, her voice shaking but strong. "Was I weak? Was I a fool, too, or just convenient? A way to mock a man you could never hope to be?" "You," Gregory lunged for her, his eyes wild. "You provincial, grasping—" He never finished the sentence. Arthur's hand shot out, catching Gregory by the throat. He didn't choke him. He just held him, lifing him onto his toes, his face inches from the Duke's. "You will not," Arthur whispered, his voice a venomous promise. "Speak to my wife. You will not look at my wife. You will not breathe the same air as my wife ever again." "Arthur, no," Amelia said, placing a hand on his arm. He looked at her, his eyes blazing. "Not like this," she said softly. "Ruin him. Don't become him." Arthur's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then, with a grunt of disgust, he released Gregory, throwing him back against the wall. At that exact moment, the Earl of Stirling, Lady Diana's father, stepped from behind the tapestry. His face was thunderous. "Vance!" the Earl roared. "You blackmailed the late Duchess? You animal!" Gregory's eyes widened in horror as he saw his audience. "You married my daughter with blood money," the Earl seethed. "That marriage is over. I'll have it annulled. You won't see a penny of her dowry. I'll see you ruined. I'll see you in debtor's prison by Christmas." Gregory Vance, ruined twice in one night, simply collapsed, sliding down the wall. Arthur stepped back, taking Amelia's hand. He pulled back the tapestry, revealing the scene to the hushed ballroom. The music had stopped. Everyone was watching as the Earl of Stirling dragged his son-in-law weeping from the room. Arthur and Amelia stood alone. The victors. Later that night, the last guest gone, they stood in the silent, empty ballroom. "It is done," Arthur said. He sounded tired. "It is," Amelia agreed. "Justice. For Isabella." He turned to her. The house was quiet around them. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "And for you, Amelia, I hope." "I was never saved by a duke, Arthur," Amelia said, meeting his gaze. "I was saved by a man who was grieving and angry and human." He leaned down, and for the first time his lips met hers. It was not the cold, transactional kiss of a stranger. It was not the desperate kiss of a savior. It was the kiss of a partner, a kiss of equals. "The West Wing, the rooms are clean," he murmured against her lips. "The maids found this." He pulled a small, silver locket from his pocket. It was the one Isabella had described in her diary, the one she had lost. Gregory must have dropped it in his haste. "Her memory is at peace," Amelia whispered, closing her hand around the locket. "And so," Arthur said, "is mine." He lifted her into his arms, and for the first time, the Duke of Rothaven carried his wife over the threshold. Not into the cold, barren chambers of the Duchess, but into the West Wing. Into the rooms that were no longer a grave, but a home. Their home. And so, the jilted bride and the cold-hearted Duke found that their bargain, forged in humiliation and revenge, had become something else entirely. They didn't just save a reputation, they saved each other. They proved that sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with a glance, but with a rescue, a mystery, and the promise that even the coldest hearts can be taught to burn again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you felt that thrill of the last-minute rescue, or the satisfaction of seeing a villain finally get what he deserved, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good historical drama. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories of shocking twists, high-stakes romance, and happily ever afters that are earned, not given. We have so many more tales to tell, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.